To the old lady who's finally moving out this year, my daughter-in-law said as she raised her champagne glass at my grandson's 10th birthday lunch. Everyone laughed. Even my son smiled. I smiled too. What none of them knew was that inside my handbag sat a sealed envelope that was about to change all of our lives. I'm Margaret Sullivan. I was 69 years old that spring, a widow of 7 years, and the grandmother of a bright little boy named Ethan who still hugged me with both arms every time he saw me. Ethan's birthday lunch was being held at a country club outside Hartford, Connecticut. Jessica had organized everything. The decorations were blue and silver. Balloons floated above every table. A 3-tier cake stood near the windows overlooking the golf course. The room looked beautiful. It should have been one of those family memories that warmed your heart years later. Instead, it became the day I finally understood exactly how my daughter-in-law saw me. I arrived 20 minutes early carrying Ethan's gift, a telescope he had been talking about for months. He loved astronomy and spent evenings pointing at the night sky from his bedroom window. I could already imagine his excitement when he opened it. The hostess showed me to the private room where staff members were making final preparations. I placed the gift beside the cake and looked around. Family photographs from previous birthdays had been arranged on a display table. I smiled when I saw pictures of Ethan as a toddler covered in frosting and laughing. Then I noticed something strange. Every major family member was represented in those photographs. My son Michael, Jessica, Ethan, even Jessica's parents. There was only one picture of me, tucked into the far corner behind a flower arrangement where it was barely visible. I told myself I was being sensitive. After all, birthdays were about children, not grandparents. Still, the sight lingered in my mind. Guests began arriving shortly afterward. Friends, neighbors, cousins, and classmates filled the room with conversation and laughter. Jessica moved through the crowd like a celebrity greeting admirers. She was dressed in a cream-colored designer outfit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Everywhere she went, people complimented her on the party. She accepted every compliment as if she had personally built the room with her own hands. Michael followed her quietly, carrying boxes and helping the staff. My son had always been gentle, sometimes too gentle, especially when it came to his wife. Lunch began around noon. Plates of grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and fresh rolls appeared on every table. Ethan sat between me and one of his friends, happily describing the planets he hoped to see through his new telescope. For a little while, I forgot every uncomfortable feeling. Then Jessica stood up and tapped her fork against a glass. The room grew quiet. She smiled broadly and lifted a champagne flute. "Before we sing Happy Birthday," she said, "I'd like to make a special toast." Several guests nodded approvingly. Jessica turned toward me. "To the old lady who's finally moving out this year and giving the next generation room to live." Laughter exploded around the room. Not shocked laughter. Not nervous laughter. Genuine laughter. The kind that comes when people think something is funny because they believe there is truth behind it. I felt every eye turn toward me. For one long second, the room seemed completely still. Then I smiled. I lifted my water glass and nodded politely. More laughter followed. Jessica looked pleased with herself. Michael avoided my eyes. Ethan looked confused. The conversation resumed as if nothing unusual had happened. But something inside me had shifted. Because that toast confirmed what I had quietly suspected for months. They already believed my house belonged to them. They already believed my future had been decided. And judging by the confidence in Jessica's voice, they thought the paperwork was already finished. I glanced down at my handbag resting beside my chair. Inside was the envelope I had received 3 days earlier from my late husband's attorney. An envelope containing information nobody else in that room knew existed. I folded my hands in my lap and smiled again. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them celebrate. Sometimes people reveal everything you need to know the moment they believe they've already won. The rest of the lunch passed in a blur of smiling faces and polished silverware, but I noticed things I might have ignored before. Once your eyes are opened, it becomes impossible to close them again. Jessica moved from table to table accepting compliments about the party, and every time someone praised her, she glanced toward me with the satisfied expression of a woman who believed she had already secured her future. Michael remained polite and attentive, but there was a distance in him that had not existed years ago. He laughed when everyone else laughed. He nodded when Jessica spoke. He avoided difficult conversations. Looking at him across the room, I found myself remembering a little boy who used to sit beside me at the kitchen counter while I baked chocolate chip cookies on Saturday afternoons. Back then, he had told me everything. His fears, his dreams, the names of the girls he liked in middle school. Somewhere along the way, that boy had disappeared. After the cake was served and Ethan opened his presents, guests began gathering their coats. Jessica's parents were among the first to leave. As they walked past me, her mother squeezed my shoulder and said, "It will be exciting when the family finally settles into that beautiful house." I looked up slowly. "What do you mean?" I asked. Her smile faltered for half a second. "Oh, I just assumed everyone knew." Then she quickly changed the subject and wished me a safe drive home. The comment stayed with me. Everyone knew. Apparently everyone except me. I left shortly afterward. The drive back to my house took about 30 minutes. The roads wound through quiet neighborhoods lined with maple trees that had begun showing hints of spring green. Normally, I enjoyed that drive. That afternoon, I barely noticed the scenery. My mind kept replaying small moments from the past year. Christmas dinner, when Jessica had casually mentioned converting my sewing room into a home office someday. At the time, I thought she was joking. Thanksgiving, when she asked whether I planned to keep maintaining such a large property alone. Last summer, when she spent an entire afternoon measuring rooms while claiming she was helping me choose new curtains. One memory after another surfaced like puzzle pieces rising from deep water. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I no longer believed any of it had been accidental. My house sat exactly as it always had. White siding, blue shutters, the front porch swing my husband built 20 years ago, a pair of flower pots waiting for warmer weather. Seeing it brought an unexpected ache to my chest. Not because I feared losing it, but because I suddenly realized how long other people had been planning their lives around it. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of cedar and old books greeted me. Sunlight stretched across the hardwood floors. Everything was peaceful. Everything was mine. I set my purse on the dining room table and sat down beside it. For several minutes, I simply listened to the silence. Then I reached into my handbag and removed the sealed envelope. The attorney had mailed it 3 days earlier with instructions not to discuss its contents until after our scheduled meeting the following week. I ran my fingers along the edge of the paper, but did not open it. Not yet. Instead, I stood and walked toward my home office. On my desk sat my laptop. I turned it on and began searching through old emails. It started as curiosity, nothing more. Yet within 20 minutes, I found something that made my stomach tighten. Buried among dozens of messages was one sent accidentally to me 6 months earlier. At the time, I had barely glanced at it. Now I read it carefully. The subject line contained only 5 words. "After we get the house." I stared at the screen. Then I read the message again. And for the first time that day, I understood that the toast at Ethan's birthday had not been a joke. It had been a celebration. I clicked on the message and immediately recognized Jessica's email address. The date was 6 months old. Somehow it had landed in my inbox instead of someone else's, and because I had been busy preparing for a church fundraiser that week, I had never paid much attention to it. Now every word seemed to glow on the screen. The message itself was short. It had been sent to her friend Melissa. "After we get the house, I am finally turning the upstairs suite into my studio. Michael still worries about his mother's feelings, but he will come around. He always does." I read the sentence 3 times. Not because it was complicated, because it was so casual, so certain. There was no discussion about buying the house. No mention of asking permission. No uncertainty at all. Just an assumption that ownership would eventually transfer to them. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The house. Not a house. My house. The home where Michael took his first steps. The home where my husband Daniel spent years restoring every room with his own hands. The home where every Christmas morning, every birthday dinner, every family photograph had been created. Jessica was not talking about a future possibility. She was talking about an outcome she already considered guaranteed. I closed the email and searched further. At first, I found nothing unusual. Family messages, school reminders, holiday plans. Then another detail caught my attention. Several months earlier, Jessica had sent me a link to an article about downsizing after retirement. A few weeks later, she had emailed information about luxury senior communities. At the time, she presented everything as concern for my well-being. "Just something to think about someday," she had written. I remembered thanking her for being thoughtful. Now the memory left a bitter taste in my mouth. I opened a drawer and removed an old photo album. Sometimes photographs tell the truth more honestly than people do. I turned the pages slowly. There was Michael at age 8 standing proudly beside the tree house Daniel built for him. There was Ethan as a toddler running across the backyard lawn. There was a picture of Jessica from her first Thanksgiving with our family. I studied her smiling face. Back then she seemed nervous, eager to belong. Or perhaps that was simply what I wanted to see. Age teaches you something difficult. Most betrayals do not arrive wearing a villain's face. They arrive carrying flowers. They offer compliments. They call you family. Then one day you realize they have been measuring the windows while you were serving dessert. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 6 o'clock. The sound pulled me back to the present. I closed the album and returned it to the shelf. Then I looked around the office. Daniel's framed photograph sat beside the bookshelf exactly where it had been for years. He was smiling in the picture, wearing the same plaid shirt he wore on weekends. For a moment, I imagined what he would say if he were sitting across from me now. Probably something simple. Daniel never wasted words. Find the facts first, Maggie. That was always his approach. Facts before emotions. Evidence before conclusions. I nodded to myself. He was right. One email was troubling, but it was not enough. If Jessica believed the house would become hers, there had to be a reason. Somewhere a conversation had happened. Somewhere assumptions had turned into plans. And plans usually leave traces. I turned back to the computer and opened my calendar. My meeting with Daniel's attorney was scheduled for Thursday morning. 3 more days. Suddenly it felt like a very long time. I glanced toward the sealed envelope resting on the desk beside me. The attorney had specifically instructed me not to open it until we met. Until now I had intended to respect that request without question. Now curiosity pressed against every ounce of my patience. Whatever was inside that envelope, Daniel had arranged it before his death. And somehow, deep in my bones, I felt connected to everything that was happening. Outside, the last light of evening settled over the yard. The house remained quiet, peaceful, unaware of the storm slowly gathering around it. I reached for the envelope again, tracing the edge with my thumb. Then I set it back down. 3 more days, I told myself. 3 more days, and I would finally learn why so many people seemed convinced that my future had already been decided without me. The next 3 days moved slowly, measured by the ticking of the grandfather clock and the steady rhythm of ordinary routines. On the surface, nothing changed. I watered my plants. I attended church on Wednesday evening. I exchanged polite text messages with Michael. Yet beneath that calm surface, I watched more carefully than I ever had before. People reveal themselves when they believe nobody is paying attention. On Tuesday afternoon, Michael called. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. He asked how I was doing, whether I needed help with yard work, whether I had plans for the weekend. The conversation felt rehearsed somehow, as if he were checking boxes on a list. Then, almost casually, he mentioned that Jessica had found information about several retirement communities nearby. Just for future planning, Mom, he said. Nothing urgent. I looked through the kitchen window, toward the backyard, where Daniel had planted a maple tree the year Michael was born. The tree now stood nearly 40 feet tall. That is thoughtful, I replied. I will keep it in mind. There was a pause. I sensed disappointment on the other end of the line. Perhaps he expected resistance. Perhaps he expected questions. Instead, I gave him neither. After we hung up, I made a cup of tea and sat at the dining room table. The same table where birthdays had been celebrated, report cards admired, and difficult family conversations resolved. I found myself remembering the years immediately after Daniel passed away. Those first months had been difficult. Grief changes the shape of every room. But even then, I never considered leaving. This house was not simply a building. It was the physical record of an entire life. Every scratch on the hardwood floor had a story attached to it. Every shelf held memories. You cannot pack 40 years into cardboard boxes without leaving pieces of yourself behind. Wednesday evening brought another surprise. Jessica posted photographs from Ethan's birthday party on social media. I rarely spent time online, but curiosity led me there. Picture after picture appeared on the screen. Smiling guests. The cake. Ethan opening presents. Michael standing beside Jessica. Then I noticed something interesting. In almost every photograph, I had been cropped out entirely. In one image, only my shoulder remained visible near the edge of the frame. In another, The chair where I had been sitting appeared empty because the image had been trimmed so tightly. I stared at the photographs for several moments. It was such a small thing, so easy to dismiss, yet it told a larger story. Erasing someone rarely happens all at once. It happens gradually. A missed invitation, a forgotten phone call, a cropped photograph, a joke disguised as a toast. One tiny cut at a time until eventually people stop noticing the person who is missing. By Thursday morning, I was more than ready for my meeting. Daniel's attorney, Robert Whitaker, had maintained his office downtown for over 30 years. He was a careful man with silver hair and the habit of organizing every document into perfectly aligned stacks. When I arrived, his receptionist greeted me warmly and escorted me into a private conference room. Robert entered a few minutes later carrying a thick file folder. He shook my hand and sat across from me. "Margaret," he said gently, "before we discuss the contents of that envelope, I need to ask you a question." His tone immediately caught my attention. "Of course," I replied. He folded his hands on the table. "Has anyone in your family been encouraging you to leave your home?" The question settled heavily in the room. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I thought about the birthday toast, the retirement brochures, the email, the photographs, the assumptions everyone seemed to share. Slowly, I nodded. Robert sighed and opened the file in front of him. "Then I believe," he said quietly, "that your late husband anticipated exactly what is happening now." For several seconds, I simply looked at Robert. The traffic outside the office windows seemed distant, muffled by the weight of what he had just said. Daniel anticipated exactly what is happening now. Those words settled into place beside every uneasy feeling I had carried for months. Robert opened the file and carefully removed several documents. About a year before his passing, he said, Daniel updated portions of his estate plan. He was healthy at the time, but he believed in preparing for every possibility. I nodded. That sounded exactly like my husband. Daniel kept flashlights in every closet and emergency supplies in the basement. He planned for snowstorms, power outages, and problems nobody else considered. Apparently, he had planned for this as well. Robert slid a document across the table. "Your husband was very clear about one thing. He wanted you protected." I lowered my eyes to the page. The language was formal and legal, but the meaning became clear quickly. The house could not be sold, transferred, or used as collateral without my written authorization. More importantly, the property had been placed inside a protective trust designed specifically to ensure that I maintained complete lifetime control over it. My fingers tightened around the edge of the paper. "So Michael cannot simply inherit it?" I asked quietly. Robert shook his head. "Not while you were living, and not without your consent." A strange mixture of relief and sadness washed through me. Relief because the house was safe. Sadness because someone had apparently expected a different outcome. Robert continued turning pages. "There is more." He removed another document and placed it beside the first. Daniel included a provision that activates if there is evidence of pressure, coercion, or manipulation directed toward you regarding housing, finances, or estate matters. I stared at him. He actually included that? He did. Robert leaned back in his chair. At the time, I asked why. He told me something I never forgot. Robert paused briefly. He said, "Margaret sees the best in people. Sometimes that is wonderful. Sometimes it makes her vulnerable." My eyes burned unexpectedly. That sounded exactly like Daniel. Not dramatic, not suspicious, just observant. He understood me better than anyone ever had. Robert handed me another folder. Inside were notes written in Daniel's own handwriting. Seeing them felt like hearing his voice again. One sentence stood out immediately. "If Margaret ever feels unwanted in her own home, something has gone terribly wrong." I read the line twice, then a third time. Suddenly the birthday lunch felt very far away. The jokes, the smiles, the assumptions, none of them mattered as much as this simple truth. Daniel had trusted me. He had spent years making sure I would never be dependent on someone else's kindness. Robert allowed me a few moments before speaking again. "Margaret, I need to ask another question." I looked up. "Have you told anyone about this meeting?" "No." "Good." His answer came quickly enough to surprise me. "For now, I recommend keeping it that way." The room became very quiet. "Why?" I asked. Robert folded his hands. "Because if people genuinely believe your situation is different from reality, their behavior may reveal important information. Sometimes the truth appears when individuals think nobody is watching." I immediately thought about Jessica. The confidence in her voice. The certainty in that email. The toast. The retirement brochures. If she truly believed control of the house was only a matter of time, then she might continue revealing exactly what she intended. Robert closed the file. You do not need to make any decisions today. Go home. Observe. Listen. Let people show you who they are. When I left the office an hour later, the afternoon sun was bright against the sidewalks downtown. Yet something inside me felt different. Lighter somehow. For months, I had felt like someone standing on uncertain ground. Now I understood that the foundation beneath me had never moved at all. Only the people around me had. As I drove home, my phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. It was cheerful and casual. She wanted to know whether I would be available for a family dinner the following Tuesday. At the very end of the text, she added a smiling emoji and one simple sentence. We have some exciting plans to discuss. I looked at the message while stopped at a red light. Then I smiled for the first time all week. Because for the first time, I suspected those plans were about to become very interesting indeed. Over the next several days, I followed Robert's advice exactly. I did not argue. I did not confront anyone. Most importantly, I did not reveal what I had learned. Instead, I allowed everyone to continue believing the story they had already written in their minds. It turned out to be surprisingly easy. On Friday evening, Michael stopped by after work carrying a container of takeout from my favorite Italian restaurant. 20 years earlier, that gesture would have filled me with warmth. Now I found myself studying him carefully, searching for the line between genuine affection and quiet obligation. We sat in the kitchen eating pasta while the evening sun filtered through the windows. For a while, we talked about Ethan's school projects and the upcoming baseball season. Then the conversation drifted exactly where I expected it would. Mom, Michael said, stirring his coffee. Have you ever thought seriously about simplifying things? I looked up. What do you mean? He glanced toward the living room. The house. The maintenance. The yard. It is a lot for one person. His tone was gentle. Practiced. Almost identical to the retirement brochures Jessica had sent. I lowered my eyes and nodded slowly. Maybe you are right. The effect was immediate. A flash of surprise crossed his face before he could hide it. Really? He asked. I am getting older, I replied quietly. Sometimes I wonder how much longer I should manage everything alone. Michael seemed relieved. Not happy exactly. Relieved. As if a difficult obstacle had suddenly become easier to move. That reaction told me more than any argument could have. The following day, Jessica called. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. She asked how I was feeling, whether I needed anything, whether I had given more thought to my future plans. I answered carefully. I have been thinking, I admitted. Lately I have felt tired. The silence that followed lasted only a second, but it was enough. Jessica heard exactly what she wanted to hear. That is completely understandable, she said warmly. You deserve a simpler life. Less stress. More freedom. Freedom. It was an interesting word. People often use beautiful words to disguise selfish intentions. By Sunday afternoon, the invitations for Tuesday's family dinner had expanded. Originally, I assumed it would be only Michael and Jessica. Then I learned her parents would be attending as well. So would her brother and sister-in-law. The gathering was beginning to look less like a casual dinner and more like a carefully planned event. That alone made me curious. On Monday evening, another clue appeared. Jessica accidentally copied me on an email intended for a local interior designer. The message discussed potential renovations to a primary bedroom suite. My bedroom suite. Measurements were mentioned. Paint colors. Flooring options. There was even discussion about removing a built-in bookcase Daniel had installed himself. I read the email twice before quietly deleting it. Then I sat in my favorite chair and laughed softly to myself. Not because anything was funny. Because the confidence was astonishing. They were already decorating rooms they did not own. The next morning, I walked through the house carrying a cup of coffee. I moved slowly from room to room. The library. The sunroom. The guest bedroom. The workshop Daniel once used for weekend projects. Everywhere I looked, memories waited patiently. This was never about property values or square footage. It was about belonging. About whether a lifetime could be treated as an inconvenience once it no longer fit someone else's plans. That evening, I dressed carefully for the family dinner. Nothing extravagant. Just a navy blue blouse and a simple pearl necklace Daniel had given me on our 25th anniversary. Before leaving, I opened the desk drawer in my study and looked at the folder Robert had prepared. Every document remained exactly where I left it. Safe, secure, waiting. Then I closed the drawer and picked up my keys. As I drove toward Michael and Jessica's house, I felt surprisingly calm. They believed I was weakening. They believed I was preparing to surrender. They believed the future was unfolding exactly as they had planned. And for now, I intended to let them keep believing it. Michael and Jessica's house was brightly lit when I arrived. Through the front windows, I could already see people gathered around the dining table. Jessica opened the door before I reached it. Her smile was warm, perhaps warmer than it had been in years. "Margaret, we are so glad you could make it," she said. The performance was impressive. If I had not known better, I might have believed it. Inside, everyone greeted me enthusiastically. Jessica's parents, her brother, Aaron, his wife, Denise. Even Ethan seemed unusually excited. The dining room table was set beautifully. Candles flickered in glass holders. Fresh flowers sat in the center. A large meal had been prepared. Looking around, I could not shake the feeling that everyone was waiting for something. We spent the first half hour discussing ordinary topics. School events, summer vacation plans, local news. Yet beneath every conversation ran an invisible current of anticipation. Several times I caught Jessica exchanging quick glances with her parents. Michael seemed nervous. He kept adjusting his napkin and checking his watch. Eventually, dinner plates were cleared away. Dessert was served. And finally, Jessica set down her fork and smiled. "There is actually something we wanted to discuss tonight." The room became very quiet. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, we have all been thinking about your future." There it was. The conversation had arrived exactly where I expected. "My future?" I asked gently. "Of course," Jessica replied. "Everyone loves you. We just want what is best for you." Her father nodded solemnly. Her mother offered an encouraging smile. It was remarkable how quickly concern can become a group activity when property is involved. Jessica pulled a folder from beside her chair. "We have done a lot of research," she explained. "There is a beautiful retirement community about 20 minutes away. Private cottages, activities, walking trails, medical support if needed." She slid several glossy brochures across the table toward me. I glanced at them politely. The photographs showed smiling seniors gardening and playing cards beneath perfect blue skies. Everything looked pleasant, carefully designed, marketed. "It looks lovely," I said. Relief immediately appeared on several faces around the table. Jessica continued. "The best part is that if you sell your house, you could easily afford the move and still have money left over." There it was again. Not if I choose. Not if I want to. Simply when I sell. As though the decision had already been made. I lowered my eyes thoughtfully. "Perhaps." Jessica's smile widened. Aaron leaned forward. "Honestly, it seems like the logical next step." Denise nodded in agreement. Even Jessica's parents began discussing the advantages of downsizing. The conversation rolled forward with surprising confidence. Soon they were discussing timelines, potential renovations, future plans. Nobody officially said the house would belong to Michael and Jessica. They did not need to. Every assumption pointed in that direction. Then something unexpected happened. Ethan spoke. "Can Grandma still have Thanksgiving at her house?" The room fell silent. Jessica answered quickly. "Things changed, sweetheart." Ethan frowned. "But Grandpa built the big table." Nobody responded immediately. The silence lingered longer than anyone seemed comfortable with. I looked at my grandson and smiled softly. Sometimes children notice truths adults work very hard to avoid. The discussion eventually moved on, but something had shifted. I could feel it. The confidence around the table had become almost reckless. People who believe victory is certain often stop being careful. As the evening ended, Jessica walked me to the front door. "I am proud of you," she said quietly. "This cannot be easy." Her tone suggested she believed I was already surrendering. I smiled back. "You are right," I said. "It has been very educational." She laughed, assuming we meant the same thing. We did not. As I drove home through the darkness, I replayed every word from the evening. Every assumption, every expectation, every carefully disguised plan. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I realized something important. Nobody had asked what I wanted. Not once. They had discussed my future for 2 hours without ever asking the simplest question in the world. And that told me everything I needed to know. The morning after the family dinner, I received another message from Jessica. She wanted to schedule a meeting the following weekend so everyone could start discussing practical next steps. The wording made me smile. Practical next steps for whom? Certainly not for me. Over the following few days, I continued my routine exactly as before. I attended my book club on Wednesday. I volunteered at church on Thursday. I met a friend for coffee on Friday morning. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Internally, however, I was paying attention to details I once would have overlooked. The most revealing moments often arrived unexpectedly. On Thursday afternoon, Ethan called me. He was using his new telescope and wanted help identifying a bright object in the western sky. We spent nearly 20 minutes talking about planets and constellations. Then his voice grew quieter. "Grandma?" he asked. "Yes, sweetheart." "Are you moving away?" The question caught me off guard. "Why would you ask that?" There was a brief pause. "Mom and Dad keep talking about it." I looked out the window toward the backyard. "And what do you think?" I asked gently. "I do not want you to leave." His answer came immediately. Simple, honest, uncomplicated. Children rarely disguise their feelings the way adults do. After we ended the call, I sat quietly for several minutes. More than anything else, Ethan's words reminded me what was truly at stake. Not a building, not money, relationships, trust, family. That evening, Robert called. He wanted to confirm several details before the following week. During our conversation, he mentioned something interesting. A few months earlier, someone had contacted his office requesting information about ownership procedures related to my property. Confidentiality rules prevented him from sharing details at the time, but now he could. "Who made the inquiry?" I asked. Robert hesitated only briefly. "Jessica." I closed my eyes. Somehow hearing it spoken aloud carried a different weight. It transformed assumptions into facts. "Did she identify herself?" I asked. "She did." Robert's voice remained calm. "She indicated she was helping with future family planning." Family planning. Another pleasant phrase hiding something less pleasant underneath. After ending the call, I opened my desk drawer and reviewed the documents again. Everything remained exactly as Robert had explained. The trust, the protections, Daniel's handwritten notes. One page in particular held my attention. Near the bottom, Daniel had written a sentence in blue ink. "Respect is easy when people need something from you. Character appears when they think they no longer do." I read the lines several times. The following Saturday arrived sooner than expected. Jessica hosted another gathering. Smaller this time. Only immediate family. According to her message, she wanted everyone on the same page moving forward. When I arrived, a large folder already sat on the dining room table. Several pages were neatly arranged beside it. Michael appeared anxious. Jessica appeared excited. Those were two very different emotions. "We are glad you came," Jessica said. "There are a few ideas we would love to share." I smiled warmly and took my seat. Around the table, everyone seemed unusually confident. They exchanged knowing glances. They spoke about possibilities as though decisions had already been made. Michael even mentioned renovation timelines. Renovation timelines. The phrase almost made me laugh. As the conversation continued, they grew increasingly comfortable, increasingly certain, increasingly careless. By the end of the evening, Jessica was openly discussing paint colors for rooms she did not own, furniture layouts for spaces she had never been invited to occupy, and future holiday plans centered entirely around a house she assumed would soon belong to her family. I listened quietly, asked occasional questions, revealed nothing, and with every passing minute, I became more convinced that the moment Robert and I had been preparing for was almost here. Because sometimes the strongest evidence is not found in documents. Sometimes people provide it themselves when they believe nobody can stop them. The following Thursday, everything came together. Robert had suggested a final meeting, and at my request, Michael and Jessica agreed to attend. I told them there were several estate matters I wanted to clarify for the future. The moment they accepted, I knew exactly what they expected. They believed this was the beginning of a transfer, a transition, the final step toward the future they had already imagined. Robert reserved the same conference room where we had met weeks earlier. When I arrived, he was already organizing documents. 20 minutes later, Michael and Jessica entered together. Jessica carried a leather notebook. Michael looked nervous but hopeful. We exchanged polite greetings and took our seats. For a few moments, nobody spoke. Then Robert opened a file and began. "Thank you all for coming. Margaret requested this meeting so that certain estate matters could be formally clarified. Jessica smiled. Michael nodded. Robert continued calmly. There appears to have been some confusion regarding ownership of Margaret's residence and future control of the property. The smile remained on Jessica's face, although I noticed her posture become slightly more rigid. Robert placed several documents on the table. Years ago, Daniel Sullivan established a protective trust. Under its terms, Margaret maintains complete lifetime authority over the property. The residence cannot be sold, transferred, modified, or otherwise controlled without her direct written authorization. Silence settled across the room. Michael blinked. Jessica stared at the papers. Robert continued. Furthermore, the trust contains additional provisions designed to protect Margaret from external pressure regarding housing and estate decisions. For the first time, Jessica spoke. I do not understand. Robert looked at her professionally. The ownership structure has never changed. Margaret remains fully protected. Any assumptions regarding future possession of the property were premature. Nobody said anything. The room seemed smaller somehow. Michael lowered his eyes to the table. Jessica looked from Robert to me and back again. I could almost see her trying to reorganize weeks, months, perhaps years of expectations. Finally, Michael spoke quietly. Mom, why did you not tell us? I looked at him for a long moment. Because nobody asked what I wanted. The words hung in the air. Not angry. Not loud. Simply true. Michael looked away. Jessica remained silent. Robert opened one final folder. Inside was a copy of Daniel's handwritten notes. He slid the page toward me, and I read the familiar sentence aloud. If Margaret ever feels unwanted in her own home, something has gone terribly wrong. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. After a few seconds, I closed the folder. This was never about the house, I said. The house was simply how I discovered the truth. Jessica opened her mouth as though she wanted to respond, but no words came. The confidence that had surrounded her for weeks was gone. Not because she had lost a property she never owned, but because the story she believed had collapsed. Michael looked genuinely ashamed. For the first time in a very long while, I believed he understood what had happened. We left the meeting shortly afterward. There were no dramatic speeches, no arguments, no celebrations. As I walked toward the parking lot, the afternoon sun warmed my face. Robert shook my hand and wished me well. Then he returned to his office. I stood beside my car for a moment and looked up at the clear blue sky. Daniel had been gone for 7 years, yet somehow he had protected me one final time. That evening, I sat at my dining room table and watched the sunset through the kitchen window. The house was quiet, peaceful, exactly as it had always been. My phone buzzed once. A message from Michael appeared on the screen. It contained only 6 words. I am sorry, Mom. Truly. I read it, set the phone down, and looked around the room. Forgiveness would take time. Trust would take even longer. But for the first time in months, nobody was planning my future except me. And that was more than enough.